Hello, I'm Zachary Rossiter,
And I'm Kyle Wiseman.
and today, in light of Endgame and the completion of probably one of the greatest achievements of cinema, in my
Okay,
opinion.
let's not go that far.
Well, when you look at it as a point of like how many things were brought together, you know, over a span of time. I mean, yes, you could say there are much greater movies, yes, but I mean in the terms of like just the complications that would have arose through like production and like all these other things. Obviously, there's greater writing in cinema, and there's greater. You could argue that cinematography is very well done in some of these movies and things like that, and special effects has been at its pretty much highest with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But I think if as like a whole, when you take all aspects of what comes into making a movie, I think that just the fact that they were able to accomplish this over a span of 11 years is incredible, and it has to be at least a contender for one of the greatest achievements.
yeah, but 11 years with 11 stinkers of movies as well.
First, we're going to just briefly go over all the movies that have been shown in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, from starting with Iron Man, ending with Endgame. And we're going to give a small insight into how we felt personally with each one. Nothing too long. Uh, then we'll get into Endgame finally. That'll be the final thing. We'll get a little bit more into the meat of that, seeing as how that just came out. And then we're just going to talk about the MCU moving forward from this point. So, I guess we'll start, obviously, with Iron Man 1.
Oh boy.
Iron Man 1, Kyle. Your opinion.
Pretty mediocre flick. But,
I mean,
it came out the same year as The Dark Knight, so it had a lot to.
yeah, I think it's apples and oranges between those two movies. One is obviously like the greatest thing ever, and I know a lot of people do believe Iron Man 1 is as well, but I mean, if you break that movie down,
It's a pretty mediocre script.
yeah, it's pretty mediocre in general. I mean, it did. The greatest achievement of Iron Man 1 is how it set all of this forward. But even people may be like, it started it, but it almost didn't, because the next movie was The Incredible Hulk, which was a flop, to say the least, and that almost stopped the MCU in its tracks. So you could make an argument that Avengers would be the real one that, like, really started this whole thing.
It's just. I find Iron Man's character kind of boring, and
I do too. He's a boring version of Batman.
he's portrayed as a boring character in Iron Man.
Yes.
So.
I think but that's based on our own personal opinion. Based on him as a character, I thought it was a fine way to do his character. I thought they did him justice.
Yeah.
I thought the way they incorporated into modern day war with like the Middle East and stuff, I thought that was fine. I don't think you can really do that story much better because it's not that interesting of a story to begin with.
You can see the
but
twist
anyway.
coming from like a mile away.
Oh god, yes. He's like the most obvious evil person.
And
in
the
world.
villains are incredibly boring. Sorry, but
Yes.
that's just it. It's Iron Man 2008.
You have the evil businessman and the evil terrorist that are evil because they're evil. Which becomes a trope in the MCU going forward. I'm evil because I'm evil.
It was the first film to demonstrate Marvel's inability to create great villains.
Yes, but that would be fixed later on. Anyway, we'll move on so we're not stuck here for too long. Your favorite movie, obviously, The Incredible Hulk.
Literally the worst movie in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like there's no getting around it. You got poor CGI. You have a terrible
Yes,
script,
I agree.
and
I disagree.
and Edward Norton in the lead role. Oh my god.
Edward Norton's a fine
He's
actor.
a bad actor, and he was a poor casting choice for the Hulk. I'm so glad that they replaced him with Mark Ruffalo.
Well, okay. I agree with you there. I think Mark Ruffalo is a much better Bruce Banner. That said, I don't mind the movie. I think it's pretty standard MCU kind of storytelling. It's fine. and I did like the villain. I thought the villain was really interesting. Now, the CGI at the end was absolutely atrocious. It's got to be the lowest point of
It's pretty
CGI.
bad.
It's like X-Men Origins Wolverine when he brings out his claws and he cuts the sink open. It's just laughably bad at some
Even
points.
that movie's better than this one.
I think it's better. All right, we're not getting into X-Men, but yes, I think it is better, but it's better because of how bad it is. All right, we'll move on. I know you could go on for hours about why you hate the Incredible Hulk, but we'll move on to Iron Man 2. Now, this also is considered the worst to a lot of people, mainly because it lacks narrative. It lacks focus and narrative. Whereas a lot of the MCU movies they follow the same kind of structure, they still have that narrative. This movie does not.
That's the problem when you juggle too many plot lines like Spider-Man 3 did.
Spider-Man 3, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Lots of superhero movies come fault to this because
X-Men
the
3.
producers, they see all these villains, they think, oh, well, the fans want to see 10 million villains, but that's just not true. You could do it more subtly, like the Winter Soldier adds, like, Crossbones and the Leaper and stuff, but they don't focus on those characters. They leave those as kind of just, little Easter eggs while they still have the main villain who has a very intriguing backstory. But we'll get to Winter Soldier.
I still find Tony Stark like incredibly irritating and arrogant. So
Yes, and he hasn't really been explored properly as a character by Iron Man 2. I also agree. I think that up until Avengers 1, I really had no interest in Tony Stark as a character whatsoever.
I still didn't by Avengers 1. I think
I saw hints. I saw little hints of his character coming to light, and I was like, he's a little bit better.
No.
And then by the time the Russo brothers get their hands on him, I'm just like, yes, this is a fully fledged
Actually,
character now. Like,
after rewatching MCU films, I'll comment on this later, but I think it's Age of Ultron that finally does Iron Man's character justice. But we can talk about that later.
all right. So I think we're both in agreement that Iron Man 2 is a pretty mediocre, if not slightly bad film.
Yeah, it's just it tried to juggle too many plot lines, and it suffers from it. And Tony Stark's still a boring character, so.
Although I will note this really quickly, I do like the introduction of War Machine. I thought it was probably the only real highlight of it. It has some pretty cool action with War Machine, and just to get him in the MCU, you start to see the birth of these little side characters now.
Wait,
Which
is that the one with Don Cheadle or Terrence Howard?
Don Cheadle is he's War Machine. Or which one's Don Cheadle? He's the modern one, right? Yeah. So Terrence his name?
Terrence Howard was in Iron Man 1.
He was in Iron Man 1, and then they replaced him moving forward.
All
right, next.
I hate Don Cheadle. He's a bad actor.
I don't mind him. I don't think he's great by
He's
any
a pretty
regard,
bad actor, especially as War Machine. So, but that's all I wanted to say about that.
All right, we'll move on to Thor. Now, this is probably where me and you really start to have very different opinions on how the MCU is looking. I fucking love Thor. I think Thor is amazing. I love the humor. I love the action. I love the storytelling. I love the characters, aside from Natalie Portman. I think that this is where, for me anyway, the MCU really starts to pick up.
I mean, if I'm being honest, the first phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe just never really gripped me the way phases 2 and 3 later would. And it's because of poor origin stories, I think. I mean, there are so many more interesting ways that you could have explored Thor's background, but instead they just chose this, fish out of water kind of.
I like the fish out of water story, but the one thing I will agree with most people on, and you probably agree with this, is that they probably shouldn't have focused so much on Earth for Thor. But the MCU really hadn't really started focusing on the cosmic side of stuff yet. They really never dipped their toes into that water and realized, oh, fans really enjoy this stuff, which they did find out with Guardians of the Galaxy. We will get there. So overall, how do you feel about Thor?
Thor's just a poorly acted. I'll admit it's not. Chris Hemsworth later develops into a much better actor, but I don't think he's a great actor of any sort by this movie. And Natalie Portman and Kat Denning, like it's stunted by poor acting, a generic plot, and a not so interesting villain, Loki.
I don't think Loki was a very bad villain. I think that he wasn't great, but I thought that he had more development than, say, fucking what's his name, Whiplash from Iron Man 2, who was absolutely stupid, and both the Iron Man 1 and 2 villains, which were just
It's
dumb.
just so boring to see the whole, oh, my brother is the one who inherits your kingdom. I have to kill him for that. Like it's just such a generic plot line. And I mean, if you're going to create a rift between Thor and Loki, just do it in a more interesting fashion. Don't follow like a 1950s comic book.
I guess. And I don't think that Loki is nearly as good as he gets commonly viewed as. A lot of people throw him in like the greatest MCU villains. No. Like, give me a break.
Yeah, maybe the greatest MCU villains of the first phase, and that's pretty bad.
Alright, let's move on. Captain America 1, the first Avenger.
And also the first great MCU film. Well, of phase 1 anyway. It's not a great MCU film, I should say, but it's pretty solid. I mean,
It's the first one you started being like, oh, these movies are actually interesting. I can dig this.
yeah, and Captain America grew to be my favorite character in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, whereas
One of my top 3. I have a lot of trouble choosing between my top 3, but yes, Captain America is easily one of the most interesting characters in the MCU.
yeah, and in the comics, especially during the 1940s, when they tried to copy that formula, um, especially in the 1970s when you had Bucky and Captain America. Like, I just didn't find those comic books engaging. So I went in to Captain America, the first Avenger, with little expectations, but I was pleasantly surprised. And I think they actually did Red Skull justice here.
Well, I grew up reading a lot of Captain America. I've always been a huge fan of him in the comics. And I'd say my top were him, Spider-Man, maybe Batman. Probably not as much Batman. Maybe just mainly him and Spider-Man. I read a lot of Superman as I got a little bit older. But, yeah, when I went to see Captain America the First Avenger in theaters, I remember I just thought, this is amazing. Like, this is such a great love letter to the comics I grew up reading. I understood that it was cheesy. I understood that it still fell into a lot of the same Marvel tropes that I'd seen with the previous movies. And that even like the Red Skull, the villain, he was very, I'm evil because I'm evil.
I wouldn't say that, because he kind of he realizes that Germany.
Well, he wants power, but he wants power because he's evil.
Well, I mean, yes, but I think it's a little oversimplified because of Hydra's development away from Hitler's ideals. I think so. I think it's actually kind of a smart power play.
Yeah, he's like interested in the history of, the Tesseract and things like that. So yes, I agree with that. But overall, I still think he's very I'm evil because I'm evil, but not so much as like certain characters like Yellow Jacket, for example.
God.
All right, we'll move on.
I should probably actually talk a bit about it. It's a decent plot with fantastic characters. So Bucky's pretty interesting. Steve Rogers is incredibly cool, just to watch in action. And I love Peggy Carter. Like, she's just like such a badass. If you're gonna
exactly, why do you like Peggy Carter?
I don't know if attack mouth, but when you do feminism, that's how you do it right.
Yes, that's like a strong. Yeah, I agree. That's like a much better representation. She isn't like, I'm strong because you're weak, right? That's not how it works. That's not how you create a
No,
strong individual.
she's
That's a bully,
she's a woman in
right?
this patriarchal society of like the nuclear family. The woman is under the man because the man is the breadwinner.
Yeah.
But Peggy obviously had to fight her way to the top. So they actually
Yes.
make her an interesting character, and she's played wonderfully by Haley Atwell, I think. So
Not to mention she is smoking hot.
she is smoking hot. Yes.
I mean, that might be considered a little misogynistic of a comment from us, but hey, man, we're just telling the truth, and every guy knows it.
Hey,
she
is was
incredibly attractive,
and she was taken with Captain America's physique. So why can't we be taken with hers?
right? He takes off his shirt. She's like, "Oh my lord!"
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. Marvel's The Avengers. So now we're entering, really, in my opinion, the beginning. You know, like this is when we start to see what the MCU has the potential to become. We're not really there yet.
I give this movie a lot of flack. It doesn't deserve everything I say about it.
It's a very basic script.
It's a poorly scripted film. I mean, you have your generic Loki villain again, and I was taken back from this because Thor was able to beat Loki by himself. Why the fuck do you need the Avengers? Oh yes, there's an alien invasion, but like, come on, Loki's at the head of this. It's stupid.
I mean, yeah, they had the chance to introduce maybe another interesting villain that could have been leading Thanos' army at the time, but I don't think they really knew exactly where all this was going at this point.
Well, that's just what the Avengers is all about, misdirection. Like it doesn't feel like it's bringing the MCU forward. Not to me, anyways. And there wasn't nearly enough character development. I mean, you do have some bits of Steve Rogers and
Iron Man,
and Black Widow, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah, Hawkeye is horribly thrown to the sidelines, especially for his second appearance, and his first appearance doesn't really even count because he's briefly in Thor 1. Very briefly. So this is his actual first outing as a character. And no, he gets very, very sidelined. And he's such an interesting character. So, I mean, I agree with you on all these points, but when it comes down to it, it's a fun movie. And only a few of the movies in the MCU have actually had me, jumping in my seat when I've seen it in theaters, and this is one of them.
I don't. I think it's a pretty mediocre foray into what the Avengers could be.
I think it's better than mediocre. I think it surpasses movies like Iron Man 1, Iron Man 2, Iron Man 3, and, fucking Guardians 2.
Oh, I didn't
to
say
all
it was
these.
bad. I just said it's mediocre.
Thor: The Dark World. I think Thor: The Dark World's a mediocre movie. You obviously think it's fucking garbage.
Yeah, they're all pretty bad, but we'll get into that.
But the one thing that it does do well is it like I said, it starts what's to come.
I think the soundtrack needs to be commended too, because I mean they literally use it in every Avengers film. The main theme. They reproduce it in some way.
And another thing, this isn't credit for the movie, the first Avengers movie. This is more credit for the later movies, especially Endgame. But later movies made that movie better because of callbacks and things like that. I find that later movies actually complement the Avengers, the first Avengers movie.
Particularly Endgame, now that we've seen that.
Particularly Endgame.
Yeah.
All right. We'll not get into any spoilers until we reach Endgame. Then we'll drop a big old spoiler warning.
Yeah.
Did we say any spoilers for Endgame yet? I don't
No,
think we
but
did.
it's fine, because I literally only said that little one comment.
All right. We'll move on. Iron Man 3. I think we both stand on the exact same position. This is one of the worst movies in the MCU. It's very mediocre at best.
I'd probably put it on the same level as Iron Man 2, just because, to me, his story is so boring, but, at least this one's a little bit more focused story wise.
Yeah.
I didn't.
The work.
I
Sorry.
think the
go on.
worst thing that you can do with a comic book movie is introduce way too many storylines. So that's why it's. I would say it's probably a little bit better than Iron Man 2.
Well, the worst thing about Iron Man 3, though, is it literally has no relevance whatsoever to any other movie. In fact, it holds back a lot of the other plot lines. Like, there's just little things like Iron Man putting down his mantle as Iron Man, but then literally in the next movie he's in, he's just like, I'm Iron Man, I don't need to explain
See,
it.
but, like that doesn't. That's just fucking stupid.
Yeah, right? So there's just, like, a lot of that going on. I think as a standalone movie, Iron Man 3 is fine. But in, like, the wider spectrum, no, I think it's probably one of the
There's
worst.
no lasting
in the MCU.
consequences or like callbacks to it per se. So why not skip it?
Exactly, right? It's literally holds no relevance. All right, next. Thor the Dark
Oh,
World.
and Tony Stark's still a boring character by that point. So
Oh, yes, yes.
Thor the Dark World. It's oh boy, I can't believe it, but apparently it's even worse than Thor 1.
Oh, go on. Thor the Dark World is a very mediocre. It's probably near the bottom of my list.
It's
But yeah,
it's pretty
like
bad.
the third worst on my
It's
list.
like they did well with the action, but they went with this dark, very dark tone that didn't complement the original Thor at all. Because, well, I mean, there is still some comedic elements throughout, but I've never.
They don't land at
No,
all.
I didn't even find Thor 1's humor landed, but Thor 2 just tries way too hard.
I was yawning in Thor 2 in theaters. The only thing I liked about Thor 2 was the visual aspects and
Yeah.
the. Sorry, I'm eating.
I mean, the villain is fine. He's not original, but he's fine. Malekith is that his name?
Yeah. Malekith is very. I'm evil because I'm evil. It's not even I'm evil because I'm evil. It's just I want to destroy everything because I want to destroy everything. Which in turn can be interpreted as I'm evil because I'm evil.
I will say that. I mean, yes, there is a storyline that will relate to another film,
Well, that. Yeah.
but it's first of all, this film is unnecessary to that storyline. Like, you don't actually have to see Thor: The Dark World to understand it, and I actually think it's this story otherwise is pretty irrelevant to Thor's character.
In a sense, but there are some. There is one important moment for his character, but that is explored later and told later.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is irrelevant, ultimately.
And Chris Hemsworth still hasn't grown into the role yet, in my opinion. So he's still given like this shaky performance. And Natalie Portman is concentrated on way too much in that. I didn't,
and she's one of
yeah.
the worst things about. She like whatever she touches nerd property wise, she just
She
like
ruins it.
poisons
Yeah.
it, man.
I
Like stay away from Star Wars. Get away. No, bad Natalie Portman.
yeah.
You're hot, but fuck off.
Go be your hot self in a better movie.
All right, we're not going to stick with Thor: The Dark World much longer. I think we both agree that it's one of the most mediocre / worst movies of the MCU.
One thing I will give it is the concentration on Asgard compared to Earth, whereas in the first film it was the opposite.
True. Which is much better, but we have such a much better Thor movie coming. Like, and that focuses so much more on the cosmic side that it's just like that kind of aspect is just like.
Well, I mean, technically you can say there are several better Thor movies coming.
Yeah, true. All right, so we'll move on. Dun, 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 dun. The Winter Soldier.
Oh my god, I'm ready to come.
I don't even need to talk. I can let you go.
So, The Winter Soldier, for me, is the best Marvel Cinematic Universe film we've ever gotten. And I think that will stay true for years and years to come. So, to me, it not only was it a great theatrical experience because of the way the Russo brothers direct amazing action scenes, but the script is actually very, like, it's the first Marvel film to divvy away from their usual formula, and I have to give a lot of credit to that. It's the first film to actually take a risk. So
I
I
agree.
love the Hydra script, like all the action scenes, the focus on Steve Rogers and Peggy's relationship, and
The villain.
the villain is
It's
amazing.
the first introduction of a actual. If you exclude Thanos, because he literally only smiles in Avengers
Oh
1.
my god, man!
It's the very first time we actually get to see a villain with character,
The Winter,
like with actual depth.
yeah, the Winter Soldier is just so cool.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the Winter Soldier is easily in my top villains, probably top 3. I'd say.
And Nick Fury, man, Nick Fury delivers. Like this is the first performance. Or well, I mean Samuel L. Jackson's a great actor, but this is the first Nick Fury appearance that I thought actually did the character justice. And obviously Samuel L. Jackson plays it like perfectly well. You can tell he's really into the nerd fandom, unlike Natalie Portman. But yeah, it's just like a great action flick, a great like spy thriller.
And the fucking score in Winter Soldier is amazing.
Awesome, yeah.
Like Winter Soldier's theme in that literally gets me every time I hear it. Just that like winding sound that's like off. It sounds off note, but it's like working perfectly with it. It's just perfect.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to put it.
It's
No, it must.
it's just a shocker of a movie. Like I love it. Great espionage.
I agree with everything you said, except for obviously it's not my favorite MCU movie, but it's definitely up in the top tier. Yeah, I just think this movie is absolutely amazing. I will note, just because I always bring this up when I'm talking about the Winter Soldier, the moment I realized the Winter Soldier was different and was just such a small little thing for me was when Captain America was chasing Bucky when he first sees him after Bucky kills or attempts to kill Nick Fury.
right.
And when he's chasing him down that hallway, I just knew that we were in for something else. You know, that something was happening to the MCU.
Yeah, and you also get the introduction to very interesting characters like Crossbones and Falcon.
Yeah. All right. Must have been Christmas around this time of the MCU because right after Winter Soldier, we got Guardians of the Galaxy, which is easily my favorite. Well, not easily, but it is my favorite MCU movie. I absolutely adore this movie. This movie is everything I want in a comic book movie. It's colorful, it's funny, it's got good action. It makes you feel good about yourself. It's not the most intriguing, captivating story like The Winter Soldier. Like you're not invested for those reasons. Like, oh, I can't wait to see what's happening with the story. You're just invested because you're having so much fun.
Yeah, it's
Right.
pretty standard fare from a a plot perspective, but
I absolutely adore it though. It's just every time I watch it, I just have so much
the
fun.
characters are very interesting, and I think it's like the first big introduction to the character of Thanos and his children, which
Yeah.
is pretty much vital to.
Well, it's the first touch on the cosmic side that actually counts. Because the only two other movies that touch on the cosmic side really, well, you could argue slightly the end of Avengers 1, but with Thor and Thor, the Dark World, they're the only ones that you really get to see anything out in the cosmos, and you haven't really seen anything by this point,
No.
right? But with Guardians, man, you are all in. Like, get ready because you're like it's a ride, man. It's just I love it. I love it.
I've never thought Chris Pratt was a great actor, but
I've never thought he's a great actor, but he is Star-Lord.
well, yeah. I mean, he's pretty funny. There's a lot of good laughs that you can get from Guardians of the Galaxy, where a lot of beforehand, much of the humor failed, at least in my opinion. Like I didn't find any MCU film before this really that comedic, but Guardians is actually genuinely funny, like from the opening scene. So
Yeah.
great '70s
All right.
soundtrack too.
Oh my god. Beautiful. I wasn't even crazy into 70s music before that movie, man. I was like, next thing I knew, I was listening to all this like funk music and like
Yeah,
I love it. Guardians actually like changed my like my literal personality. That movie was so good it literally changed my personality. Like what music I was listening to, you know.
yeah.
Anyway, moving on, Age of Ultron.